So welcome to our panel discussion this morning. My name is Katie O'Reilly. I'm Executive Director at the Milken Institute, and I'm going to do very brief introductions, do some table setting for the conversation, and then we're just going to jump right into it. So to my left, all the way to my left, is Fred Hochberg, who's Chairman and President of the Export-Import Bank in the U.S. Some of you may have seen him on the U.S. Overview session. And then Jason Collins, who's a retired NBA player, I'm sure everybody knows, doesn't need introduction, but an activist. To my immediate right is Randy Berry, who's Special Envoy for Human Rights for the LGBTI persons in the U.S. State Department, the first person to hold that position. And then next to him is Ross Lajeunesse. I was struggling with the last name. Okay.
No, it's great, Katie.
Global Head of International Relations for Google. And then to all the way on the end is Beth Brooke Marciniak, who is Global Vice Chair of Public Policy for EY. So we're thrilled to have all of you here for this conversation. So I'm going to try to do just some really brief table setting. Where can I see the slides? Okay, right there. So, so the issue of LGBT rights in America is something that's shifted considerably over the last decade. I mean, you could argue the last couple of decades, but certainly the last 5 to 10 years. It was a topic of discussion at the Global Conference last year. I think what I wanted to just show in the next couple of slides is sort of how quickly the issue has changed. So if you look up at slide 1, this shows you, 2006. So we're looking 10 years back. States legalizing same-sex marriage. There was one. So that was the state of what was happening 10 years ago. If we move ahead, 5 years ago we had, well, it looks like 5. And then back to 2014, which was the year before the historic Supreme Court decision, we were getting closer, but then, in 2015, this is what happened. So that was a Supreme Court decision that made same-sex marriage legal across the U.S. So as we continue, though, there's been, and this is something I want to talk about in the panel discussion, the landscape in terms of employment protections is very different. So you can see here states that have some or limited protection laws. Most people don't realize actually in the U.S. that you can be fired in the majority of U.S. states for being gay or transgender. There's nothing that protects you from that. Then this just is a slide that shows you over the last few months states that have had recent high-profile anti-LGBT legislation introduced, which we're going to talk a bit about. When you move internationally, I think the challenges get a bit more complex. So there's 34 countries around the world that recognize gay marriage, which is actually quite a bit more than there have been recently. 65 countries altogether with LGBT discrimination protections. Then when you move into sort of the darker side of this, you can see there's 75 countries still around the world where being gay, you actually can be punished with imprisonment, and 8 punished with death. So this is, we have the conversation today is going to start on the U.S. and the landscape of what's happening here and corporate America's involvement with that. But because everybody on the panel really has international experience, we're going to move to that and talk about how some of what's happened with corporate America hopefully can or cannot translate. So that's the discussion that we want to have. So I want to, just to set up over the past couple of months, we've had a number of states, including Georgia, North Carolina, and Mississippi, who recently introduced legislation that would kind of rescind or roll back protections for LGBT people. So we've seen that as obviously a negative trend. And then I don't know how many saw the news today, but it looks like President Obama is going to announce that the Stonewall Inn is going to be a historic U.S. site. So there's positive and negative, and that's kind of what we want to get into today. And to start, I mean, the corporate America has really been, for whatever reason, and this is what we'll talk a bit about, very out front on this issue recently. And so Beth, I want to start with you because you're one of the most senior women in business globally. EY operates, I think, in 155 countries. So just can you set us up here and give us some context that why is corporate America getting in the fray here?
Thank you, Katie. I think corporate America is in the fray because economically it matters to the bottom line of companies. The economic business case is overwhelming, so it's not really from a human rights perspective, I think, as much as it is from a bottom line perspective. And when you And I think we realize that we can't control the laws, we can't control the cultures, whether it's states or countries, but we can control our workplaces. And the economies of multinational companies, I mean, EY is, a $28 billion company in 155 countries. That's an economic force that's bigger than some countries, and then you put a handful of companies together and we are bigger than a lot of countries. And so the ability to control what's in our workplace is what we should control and what can start to change society. So I think that's why you're seeing us out front. The business case, I mean, and there's a lot starting in the last probably 2 years starting to come out, whether it's open for business or out leadership. There's a lot of groups putting out the business case very clearly, and it's 3 dimensions. It's consumers, it's talent, and it's innovation. It's a $3.7 trillion consumer market, and that's if you just look at the LGBT population. Nobody's quantified the ally effect of the consumer market. And I think what businesses who get it realize is that people will leave you. Customers will leave you and you won't even know it. You can't quantify what isn't coming to you or what is leaving you as a customer. So that $3.7 trillion consumer market is just an indication of how big this is, and you ignore it at your own peril as a company. Talent, in the professional services business for EY, this is central to why we care about this issue. We need talent, we need diverse talent, we need the best talent, and the LGBT population around the world is an enormous source of that talent, and it's an enormous source of our innovation. Employees and it's not just the LGBT employees, it's if you are an inclusive workplace, the research shows that your employee workforce will be more engaged, not just your LGBT population. So it's all employees. It's a competitive advantage if you're an inclusive and you're known to be an inclusive employer. LGBT individuals want to work for you, and so talent, innovation, and I think those are quite clear. What is also clear is that while the business case I think is clear, it is not well accepted, and progress against it is slow. Credit Suisse just came out in the last couple weeks with a research study, and they looked at the effects on stock price of an inclusive workforce for LGBT, and they showed a 3% differential in stock price for companies that are inclusive. What was more interesting to me in the study is Credit Suisse went out, they looked at 3,000 companies, and they could only find 270 companies that fit their definition of companies that were LGBT inclusive. That's less than 10%. That says we have a long way to go.
And Credit Suisse, actually, we had somebody from Credit Suisse on the panel last year who talked about they've launched the first LGBT index, where you can they've taken the data from HRC to put together a portfolio of companies. So if you want to invest and put your dollars there, you can do that, which is interesting. So Ross, I'm going to go to you. You run international relations for Google.
Right.
50,000 employees around the world, I think.
North of that, but yeah.
North of that, I think, but the reputation of Google as being kind of one of the most innovative, forward-thinking companies, certainly in the U.S., probably in the world. I mean, how core to your business do you see this?
Look, when the way we think about it at Google is really, it's certainly from the perspective of our employees. We say and think about our employees, our raw materials are really ideas. And when you run a business like that, it doesn't make any sense to leave anyone outside the room. So it is about welcoming everyone to the table and certainly providing an environment where they are able to devote their energy and their talents to making better products and to the job at hand. I mean, there's, for those of us who spent part of our lives in the closet, there's an incredible amount of energy and time wasted on hiding and worrying about it, and does this person know, do I act a certain way or at that reception, or, and when you are liberated from that, there's, an incredible release of energy. And we want that energy at Google going toward your work, to your products, making, to your ideas, to the issues at hand. So that's a key part of it. I mean, we are also a company, and we take pride at this, that we try and do the right thing. Also, and so that is an element of this. We just have always believed that inequality and inclusion as a concept and as an ideal, but the business case is very clear for us as well. And I agree with Beth that, there's certainly a lot of work to do. But when you look at the HRC Corporate Equality Index, we have over 400 companies now who, score a perfect 100%. And a little over a decade ago, it was about 10. Mm-hmm. And when I first started working on LGBT issues, I was a staffer for Senator Kennedy, an early version of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. That was about 20 years ago. One of my jobs was to call economists and companies and try and get their support for this legislation. And I can tell you, that was a very hard task. People would take the calls because I was calling from Senator Kennedy's office, but there was a reluctance, a hesitance to get engaged in what they saw as social issues. Mm-hmm. That's not key to our business. Why would we do that? And I think the sea change has been that companies see this as an economic and as a business issue. Mm-hmm. And as Beth said, it's about talent. It's about reaching the full range of consumers. And it's really about, for many of them increasingly, it is about doing the right thing.
I mean, how important do you think advocates were in reframing that conversation, in the sense of was there an effort to say to engage with CEOs and say, forget the activist part of this, forget the political implications, let's talk about the bottom line. And
what changed it all, from my perspective, is all of us coming out. That's the only thing. It's the personal connection that continues to drive change, and there's no substitution for that.
Yeah.
I remember being out on the Hill. I mean, the Hill has always been a place with an incredibly large number of LGBT staffers for whatever reason. Very few of them, when I came out 22 years ago, were out. Being out was almost a political statement in and of itself back then. And there were offices where, and I think that's still the case today, that simply you couldn't be out. I think that has changed, and every time someone comes out, it makes a difference. Mm-hmm. It really does. So in a way, it has been advocacy, but I see the advocates as everyone who's come out and been out at work and continued to do a great job and continued to be a great member of a company, a great member of a team. That's advocacy.
Right.
And that's what's really changed.
So we're going to come back to that, actually, but I want to go to Fred, because just maybe for a little more of an international perspective. I mean, so you're running the U.S. Export-Import Bank, supporting American companies that want to expand abroad, but you also have experience. I mean, you were running Lilly and Vernon for a number of years, so I'm sure you have a perspective on the employee retention and all of that. But as you're looking globally, I mean, how important do you think this issue is for U.S. businesses wanting to expand?
Well, I'll give an example. I was recently, it was actually here in California, it was in February, right after President Obama met with the ASEAN countries, world leaders in mid-February. The economic ministers stayed an extra few days and were joined by people from Exim Bank, Commerce, and so forth. And I met with one of the senior ministers from Indonesia, and we chatted. And 10 minutes later, he came back to me and he said, which I was surprised, he said, well, I Googled your background after we spoke. And he said, I see you have a partner. And I feel terrible what we've just done in Indonesia for LGBT people. And I thought of that listening to Ross and so forth, and that is, biography is probably the strongest thing we all have. And just in my bio, and I will tell you, when I was in the Clinton administration, at that time, I put in my bio that I had been, previously I was co-chair of the Human Rights Campaign, the largest lesbian gay civil rights organization. And people, this is in the late 90s, and I said, well, do you really need that in your bio? And I go, yeah, if I was on the board of the United Way, it would be in my bio.
Right,
Why is that not in my bio? So, and I was in the Clinton administration, but change is hard and it has to filter down. Mm-hmm. So that was it. That was in the 98. But I thought, in listening to Ross, I mean, the fact that Indonesian minister came over to me, and that had an impact. And so I think, one of the most powerful things we can do globally, and particularly because I think that the last 2 or 3 years have been the best years for LGBT people in America, notwithstanding some of the laws that have been passed of late, because those laws right now are reactionary laws. They're not a problem. They're simply trying to gin up and not let this issue go away. And it's been some of the worst times globally. So I think that most everybody on this stage here has a global footprint, which is part of what we're talking about today. And I just, biography is an important part of that.
Okay, so we're going to come back to the global piece too, but Randy, I want to get you into the conversation because as I mentioned in your introduction, you're the first person to hold this position within the U.S. administration that's dedicated really exclusively to LGBTI individuals, right? And so can you talk a little bit about why the administration felt that was an important thing to do? And if, any perspective you have on the model of corporate engagement working internationally would be great to hear too.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, just about a year ago, Secretary Kerry asked me to take on this new initiative of shaping in a policy and a method of contact and communication that really took a look at how the United States government could use its relationships, its influence, its contact to essentially bend the moral arc of the universe a little more rapidly than it is already predisposed to do. So over the last year, I've had the pleasure of traveling extensively to principally have contact with senior levels of governments within civil society structures and other cultural and traditional players, with religious leaders, and also with leaders in the business community. That I think specifically as it pertains to business, I believe that that this is one of the great unwritten chapters of the global movement. That I believe, just as we've seen in the United States, the business community play a critical role in working for equality. These companies that are represented here on this dais and many others are working to enjoin that conversation overseas. And the thing that I think is really important to note is this is not an issue of charity. That these companies are doing it because they understand that diversity improves the integrity of their brand. It increases their productivity and their profitability, and that's good for business. And we know that to be true. That's a conversation that I believe needs to be had with government leaders, especially in some of the most challenging places. I might just pick up on one thread that both Ross and Fred also mentioned, and that's the power of visibility in bios. The State Department may be a government entity, but we've also seen that massive change occur internally as well, to the point that when I entered the Foreign Service more than 20 years ago, that was just on the heels of a policy that had been put on hold, where we could have our security clearances taken away from us, which is a career ender for a Foreign Service officer. Today we have 8 openly gay serving ambassadors all around the world, and in some pretty challenging environments as well. And I will tell you, one of the more surprising experiences that I've had is in having conversations in difficult places where my bio is also freely available, to have senior folks in government or media after a conversation where I make some explicit reference to my husband or my kids, actually indicate or ask or express the thought that they didn't know I was gay in the first place. That's the problem here is the lack of visibility, because it just doesn't conform to what many people's idea of what being LGBTI looks like. Okay,
so let's go to that topic of visibility, because I want to get you into the conversation. Probably the most high-profile, visibly out person on this panel, anyway.
And the tallest.
So everybody
has a real problem with that.
Very visible.
So professional sports is one of the least likely places I think you expect. And there has been gains over the last couple of years, people coming out, even people while they're actively playing. Can you just tell us a bit about that process and why you felt like it was so important to do?
Well, it's funny when you talk about visibility and my height. I really don't blend in except on a basketball court.
Yeah.
So I reached a point in my private life where I had told my family, my friends, I see my mother in the back row. I'd like to acknowledge her.
Wow.
So thank you for her love and support. But there were family members that I told, and they supported me 100%, but they said, they came from a different generation, and they said, you can just, we love you, we support you, but you don't need to be public about it. And I said to those family members that's not the person that you raised me to be. You raised me to be proud of everything that I am, whether I'm African American, my height, And being gay is just another part of me to celebrate and to be proud of. So I made the decision, along with, I see one of my agents in the background help me, to come forward to tell my story, because I didn't want to go out on a date, and in this day and age when everybody sees with the camera, with your cell phone, and sure enough, it would end up on TMZ or something, and then I would be reacting to the story.
Right.
So I wanted to tell my story on my own terms, come out, and it's something that Ross talked about as far as an employee, all the energy that we waste, and especially being a professional athlete, we have a lot of other stuff to, I have to worry about Shaq and Dwight Howard and Yao Ming, not about what you said earlier about, like, did I come across too, like, what did I say? All that nervous energy, I wanted to let it all go, and I reached a point where I was ready to come forward, tell my story, and it's been an incredible experience. And recently, I just attended a wedding on Saturday, and with a friend of mine. We became friends about 3 years ago after I came out. I'll tell quickly, his name is Brian Hayden. Pat Hayden is his father, for all of you in the sports world. And Brian talked about during his wedding, and I was like almost brought tears in my eyes about in the toast, and he was thanking everyone for coming, and then he singled me out and said it was because of my coming out that inspired him to come out. And here he is 3 years later getting married and getting ready to become a father with his husband. And it's important, what Fred was talking about, to have people who have that platform in the public eye. If you're a professional athlete and an actor and whatever, if you have that public eye, to step forward, live your authentic life, because it will inspire others. It will make someone else's life easier.
So why in professional sports, why is it such a challenge still?
Oh, gosh, it's tough. Not only in male sports, but female sports too. We were talking earlier, with Beth about less than a month ago. It was about a month ago. Jennifer Azzi, the female head coach for San Francisco, came out. She was introducing Rick Welch, who's the president for the Golden State Warriors, at an event for the Anti-Defamation League. And when she was introducing him, she publicly came out, and in doing so became she's the only one in the NCAA female Division I out lesbian head coach. And there are many, many others, but for whatever reason, because of recruiting, because of whatever other factors, they're afraid to live their authentic lives. And I know in my work with the NBA, being a professional athlete, coming across other athletes who are closeted, both in the professional level and collegiate level. I'm not here to tell anyone to do how to live their life, but I just remember, and I also see Harvard Westlake, my high school people here also in the crowd, giving shots out to everyone. But I remember when I was in high school, I got a chance to meet Sally Ride, first female astronaut.
Yeah.
She's also from Harvard Westlake, Westlake School. And I remember when she passed, that was when I found out that she was a lesbian. She came out basically in her obituary. And I just remember being a kid and thinking, I didn't want that to be me. And I didn't want that to, everyone has their own life to live and path, and but I knew that wasn't going to be my path. And I hope that other people realize that doesn't have to be your path. That if you do step forward, you do come out, there's a huge community waiting for you to support you. And another issue that's so important to me is leadership. One reason I felt safe to come out in the NBA was because of the leadership of David Stern, our commissioner, and now Adam Silver, our commissioner. They were setting the groundwork that I saw as like those micro signals that you see from leadership, that it's okay. When I saw them fine Kobe Bryant $50,000 for using a gay slur. Kobe has obviously come a long way, and he's very an advocate and very supportive of me and the LGBT community. But several years ago, he said a gay slur on the court. He got fined $50,000, which set the tone that if the MVP, if the star of the league can get fined $50,000,
Yep.
that everyone can be fined, and that this is going to change the culture of our sport. So I think leadership from head positions, whether it be the commissioner of leagues or the NCAA, they need to continue to set the tone that signals to everyone that the culture of sport is changing. It's going to be more inclusive.
Great. And it's on the topic of leadership, Beth, I just want to turn to you because, I mean, you're very senior in your organization and have been for quite a while. You came out 4 years ago. We talked a little bit about that last week when we spoke. Why did you decide to come out, and why do you think it took so long?
Well, Jason's story just brought tears to my eyes because it just resonated
Yeah.
so much, and I'm sure it does with all of us. Why? You know, my private life was my private life. I was well into my career,
Yeah.
and I never thought about coming out. Actually, I didn't understand the importance of it. I didn't understand the importance of being visible and out. And boy, do I get it now! But only in hindsight. I couldn't have convinced me of that 4 or 5 years ago. I came out for the Trevor Project, doing the It Gets Better campaign for gay teenagers thinking of killing themselves. And our LGBT leaders within EY came to me as a staunch, straight ally and said, will I be the closer for the video? Just, they're going to have, 6 or 7 LGBT people talking about, how life got better for them at EY. Would I close the video? I'm like, sure, I'll do that. Happy to do that. And so, you roll the clock 2 months forward, and I'm on an airplane, and I'm looking at what I got to do the next day, and there's the script that I'm supposed to read as the straight ally to close the video, talking to gay teenagers. And literally, I had that moment on the plane. I had had a glass of wine. I had.
Always helpful.
Truth. It always helpful. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, what? If it were me, I read what was written. I'm like, that's just a crock of shit. This is not what I would want to say. And what I wanted to say was not, so the video basically, I just pulled out a sheet of paper and started writing. And what I said was, I'm gay and I've struggled with it for many years. I may always struggle with it, but that's my deal, it's not your deal. What I wanted to talk to the kids about was difference and how they were valuable because of their difference, not in spite of their difference, and they needed to value that. And that came from a history not just of being closeted gay. I entered a profession in 1981 that was predominantly male, straight, extroverted, and Republican. And I was a female, introvert, Democrat, and closeted gay. I mean, I was different from the day I joined. And thank goodness I joined an organization that embraced my differences and valued me for it rather than rejected me for it. And so my message to the kids was just so authentically passionate about difference. Turn it the next day, or once I come out, and that what I got back from all over the world was from not just LGBT professionals, but it was from parents and everybody sharing stories about difference. And what I realized in my coming out was that everyone is different. Everybody walks out of our houses every morning with something on our shoulder, with society telling us a little self-doubts. We're just a little bit different in some way, and being made to feel uncomfortable for our difference. And the stories I got back were all about how my video sort of empowered everybody to say, wow, I need to be proud of my difference. I need to be proud I'm 7 foot tall and African American and gay, And so it just empowered me to understand difference matters, everybody's different. And just, what we're doing within our workplaces is not just, it's been eye-opening for me, it's not just about our employees. We are saving lives because as we work to develop allies within our organizations that are supportive of our, and sort of, are with the program here, they have sons and daughters who are coming out and they may be struggling with it. And so the more we do to be supportive organizations, we're just influencing so much more than just our workplaces. And so it's just been a learning for me.
Can I just jump in there to comment a little bit on the example that you've stated, that the fact of personal leadership, personal visibility, I think is extraordinarily important. But then when you put that to work in the service of your company, the fact that you've thrived in this environment, and that you're lucky enough to be working in a company that has always embraced that that kind of difference. I think, given the footprint that EY has globally, I mean, think about the influence that EY has throughout its global operations. Are you saving lives? Absolutely, yes, because what we know from our contact with the business community and from my travels is that in many cases, in many countries, the only place a person feels safe to be out is at work if they happen to work for one of these progressive companies.
Yeah.
And that's a relatively small number that you mentioned at the outset that have really embraced this. But what I believe is that look at the companies that have done so.
Yeah.
Right, these are companies that are thriving. Look at the countries who have liberalized policies. These are countries that are thriving. That produces a pull effect that I think is substantial. And when someone like EY or Beth has a conversation with a Minister of Economic Development, Minister of Investment and Trade in a foreign country, you have the potentiality of having a conversation that is not inherently political, that can produce change merely as an issue of economic development. And I think that's powerful because what we have found is that in our political engagements with countries around the world, there is a limit to that, where you hit a certain wall in terms of pushing for change, that political conversations oftentimes have blowback, especially if you're representing the U.S. government. But if we look at this in an allied sense and the understanding that we all thrive through the embrace of diversity, this is a partnership that I think is really remarkable and where the business community has a huge role to play.
Oh, I think it's a huge role to play, and I guess another learning related to that, Randy, for me was, EY has long been one of the most progressive, inclusive employers, but it was my coming out that I realized just unlocked our LGBT population to trust. It's like just seeing me succeed and be a lesbian. It just empowered all of our employees in the world to say, now we trust it. We knew it, but maybe we didn't trust it.
And I think the shift from that conversation of to be gay or to be LGBT and be within a corporate structure, often the conversation is about assimilation and making everybody feel like I'm actually not that different. Like,
That's right.
Please tolerate me, when in fact I am, right? And that's the whole piece of it, right? Is that diversity and that different life experience could be celebrated and actually brings a much more sort of interesting perspective around decision making, around corporate culture, around just.
But I think it's something Fred said. The biography is important, and the Indonesian minister knew you before he knew that.
Right.
The people around the world knew me before they knew this.
Right.
And I think there's such power in that. They love us. And they don't now not love us.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I've celebrated 3 of the last 5 birthdays in Saudi Arabia because I happen to do business there. And each time the business hosts heard, and there was a giant cake, and I thought, well, that is a kind of remarkable place, of all places in the world, to be, by business leaders and ministers to say, well, I have brought you a birthday cake.
Right.
And they've all read my bio. I mean, it's online. So there is a change. Though, I will tell you what, listening to this, I mean, one of the things that concerns me in the federal government, and that is I know that this was more true when I served in the Clinton administration, but still true today. There are a number of, and Randy might have a perspective, civil servants or foreign service officers who are gay or lesbian or transgender and are not comfortable coming out because they go, well, this is great under President Obama, but I don't know what will happen in 2017. And although I can't, it's going to be harder to push things back, I experienced a number of say, well, this is all fine now, but I'm not taking chances because maybe the next chairman or maybe the next secretary, even if it's officially or unofficially, may not adopt the same thing. And corporate culture, I think, is actually more reliable than a political administration because it does change. I know under President Clinton, when I was at the Small Business Administration, we had African American Heritage Month, Women's History, Asian Pacific Islander this month. We had a gay pride event. That stopped in 2001. It restarted in 2009, but it stopped for 8 years. So I was just listening, and I think that is a difference in the government sector than, say, the private sector, Frank.
Did you want to respond
Well,
to that?
I would just say from what I can see at the State Department, the level of visibility and the leadership from civil servants and from foreign service staff as well, including as well as political appointees at the State Department, is that there's been a very, I think, an irreversible trend that's
It's
developed.
harder to push it
That-
back.
that
but
I don't-
I know there's some reluctance still when I talk to people.
Indeed, but I think, certainly as I look at this over the long term of my 23 or 24 years at State, the progress has been really extraordinary.
Yeah.
And that, especially among the rank and file within the civil service and foreign service ranks, we're seeing really tremendous leadership, and I think it's hard to put that back in the box.
So if we shift internationally just for a bit, because in the lead up to this panel, I talked with each of you about experiences you'd had in different countries and the sort of taking the temperature around the world, and I think Fred, you in particular told an interesting story about the meetings that you make sure to do with business leaders, that you meet with women business leaders and LGBT business leaders because they're often not at the table in many parts of the world. So can you share a little bit about maybe some surprising anecdotes or places where you're feeling particularly hopeful or challenged, and then I do at some point want to get into this piece of local partnerships, because I think that's important too, is how, even on the ISIS panel at lunch, there was conversation about, Western democracy imposing values, and that often can lead to backlash and is counterproductive. So maybe you could just start with the.
Most recently, I was in Pakistan, and Randy and I had a little talk about that. I was in Islamabad, and Pakistan is the Islamic State of Pakistan. It's very clearly it's a religious state, and there, as elsewhere, I often try and meet with some LGBT people as well as women leaders, as I said, because as a government leader, I felt I frequently was in a room and they were all men, and so I wanted to make sure that I saw other parts of the culture. And we met with there were 3 who came, and what was the surprising takeaway was that transgender had an easier time in Pakistan than gay or lesbian. And it was somewhat puzzling to all of us, but I think there was a degree of, at least we discerned, a more fluidity about sexuality. And being identified or gay or lesbian was just, actually waving a flag, versus transgender somehow had a sense of fluidness, and I could ignore it, or I could accept it, or I could pretend if I was with that person that, I thought that was a woman, or I really thought that was a man. And I was quite surprised, because I would say in Western culture, it's the reverse. I would say that transgender has a much more difficult time in our country, in Western cultures, than gay or lesbian today. And I was it sort of upended everything, that at least there, the transgender community had a little easier time than the gay or lesbian community. And they really were very much pushing back against, why do you have to label it gay or lesbian? Why can't you just sort of, and I think it's partly not wanting to acknowledge sexuality. Sexuality is a very,
Generally speaking. Right?
Generally speaking, it's just a very charged issue, because it goes to your very core. And I think so that was a real surprising takeaway there. But I've had a chance, I remember I met with, I think he's coming to America this month, an Indian prince from the old families who is gay. And I remember looking at my agenda and I said, this is the first time I'm going to meet a prince who's a queen. And there was a little nervous laughter in my office, because everybody says, what are we doing here?
Right. Are you supposed to say that? Right.
So I did meet a prince who was a queen, and he's quite eloquent, and I think he's going to be in the States in the next few weeks also,
great.
At a couple of diversity conferences.
Jason, what about, I know you've been involved in, the Olympic Games in Brazil and Rio, and are you having conversations there about all of this?
Yeah, I through the NBA, they have many, many different partners, and one is the U.S. government and the State Department. So I went as part of a sports envoy to Brazil this past fall, and while there, spoke with some coaches from the Brazilian Sports Federation about living your authentic life and having very frank and honest conversations about sexuality, and they seemed very open to it. And also went with a WNBA player Shanae Ogumike, and she was talking about being an immigrant and female rights and being the importance of encouraging young women and young girls to go into sports. And so from both angles, they were very open, the coaches, and trying to develop and be ready for when their players do come out to them. And recently I was in China the past couple of weeks and met with folks over there, and the NBA has offices in Beijing and Shanghai, and I think it's important for those employees for me to go and talk to them and be visible. Again, it goes back to being visible and discussing the topics and being proud of who you are, and constantly having that dialogue, because that's the only way that things will change, is to actually have those conversations and to talk.
Where are there, I mean, this could be for anybody, but places you feel particularly concerned about, or challenges that maybe that wouldn't be in the headlines?
Right. I'd like to address that, but maybe first just a
Yeah.
quick comment on what Jason just said, is that we at the State Department have been extraordinarily pleased to partner with Jason because we feel that we can really engage in conversations that transcend government, that transcend cultural institutions, that transcend all of these things, and sports is obviously
sports
an
and
incredibly
music.
powerful
Right.
way to do that. The business
Diplomacy.
community and engagement there, I think, is no different from that. But I would also commend Jason, because on the same trip he also worked to feature and work to reduce stigma against people with disabilities, and worked on several events there to do that. And these are fundamentally related issues, I would say. To the issue of where I have greatest concern, I think you showed a very poignant map up there, and that was the 80 countries that still maintain some sort of criminalization, and it's a key part of our policy to do what we can to get rid of those laws. Now, fully half or more of the states that maintain those laws don't actually enforce them. In some cases, they have announced publicly that they won't enforce these laws, but their mere existence really provides some incredible barriers, including for the business community. Because if there are laws on the books that criminalize this, that is an obstacle for legal and regulatory reform that businesses need. If you're going to really tap, the talent that you have and use them in your global operation, do you really need to take into account whether or not you can send this employee to this country because of their restrictive policies? So,
Or intimidation for citizens, right?
Indeed,
Yeah.
that is all part of a broader issue. But I think the more we can do to see decriminalizations occur. I mean, we've seen this occur in Mozambique last year. We've seen the government of the Seychelles take a step forward. And there's an interesting other observation that I would make, and that is to look in our own backyard here in the Western Hemisphere, where I am most hopeful is to look at the tremendous leadership we've seen coming out of South American states, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Brazil, Colombia. These are the states that have been defining the conversation in human rights terms, but also in terms of domestic policy at home. That's a tremendous power, it's a tremendous engine of change. And I believe that it has the power to influence those states, for example, in the English-speaking Caribbean, who are number of them included in that statistic, who have inherited these laws and are members of the Commonwealth, where half these states sit. So doing what we can do through business engagement and otherwise, to bring attention to just how problematic these criminalization statutes are, I think is really important.
I think Randy raises a very good point that one of the issues for companies doing business globally is the safety and well-being of employees and staff on the ground. And that's certainly a consideration that Google makes when deciding where to put a new office or to have a regional headquarters or something like that. I think, from our perspective, we definitely engage on these issues wherever we are, but that will take a different form depending on the environment in which you're operating. I mean, for India, and there are some smart ways of engaging, and then there's, as much as you want to sometimes go barreling in, guns a-blazing, that's not always the most effective way of changing the dialogue. So, for each country we do an assessment of what can we do here, how can we be most effective in changing the environment. When I used to lead Asia Pacific for the company, and sometimes it's a fairly small thing that you can do that makes a difference. In Singapore, there had been something called Pink Dot, which was a fairly small gathering of LGBT people, and they couldn't even frame it as such. It was just a certain day in a certain park where people would show up wearing pink shirts, and they would form sort of a dot. we became the first corporate sponsor of Pink Dot in 2011. And what it signaled to the Singaporean government was our support for that community. And I was really proud when the following year they picked up a number of other sponsors, and it's now turned into something fairly significant. It was just a small step that we took. It was a small amount of money, and we just said to our LGBT employees, you know, we support you. We want you to go to this thing if you feel comfortable doing that, and we'll go too. And we made sure that our office leadership was there as well. India, very similar thing. We knew that there were LGBT employees who were not out at work. They just didn't feel comfortable being out. So 2 years ago, we decided to have our global LGBT employees offsite in India. And our India manager, who is not LGBT, was fully on board. He sponsored it. And what that all signaled and spoke at the meeting, and what that signaled to everyone in the India office is, this is a company policy. This company supports LGBT employees. If you have a problem with that, the company has a problem with you and not the other way around. And in the aftermath of that, we've seen a number of Indian employees come out because they felt safety. They felt that they could do that. They felt like they had the support, to Beth's point, of very senior leadership at the company. And I know that those employees are better at their jobs now because they don't have to spend the time, spend the energy worrying about concealing who they are. They can bring their full selves to work. You know, so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It depends on the company. It depends on the environment. Sometimes, in the case of Russia, you know, we felt what we could do is during the Sochi Olympics, we just did our, I don't know if you're familiar, you know, the Google homepage. We put the rainbow colors up there. It sends a signal, but we didn't feel we could do something in country. But, you know, there are small, sometimes what seems like a small step to those of us in the West has profound impacts to those people around the world, both in your office and outside.
Yeah, what Ross said, I think is so important, that everything's got to be calibrated locally. So you can have a global view, but it has got to be implemented strategically at a local level. What might work in that country? So Pink Dot in Singapore to get the ball rolling. That's where I'm so encouraged, Randy, by what business and the government will be doing together, just because you have to be so locally sensitive. Through the embassies, you have such that local sensitivity. Through our local businesses, we do. But it's not one thing. It has to be sustained. I know in Japan, we've been at Japan for like 5 years, it feels like, and so right after I came out, I was asked to keynote something called the Tokyo Superstars Award in Japan. It was like the first gay kind of gala that was going to be in Japan. They asked me to keynote it. So I said, absolutely, I'll do that. It was kind of the first thing I did publicly. I stayed quiet for a while after I came out because our LGBT people wanted me to get a little smarter with being out, which was so smart on their part. So I agreed to keynote this. So I took my wife. And so right before I'm supposed to go on stage to keynote this, I said, Michelle, why don't we just go up there together? Because I just had a sense that in Japan, they needed to see us as a couple. She's a successful entrepreneur. She, former WNBA player. I'm like, she's a rock star. I'm like, let them see us together as a couple and understand the normalcy of this. And that was kind of the start. And then just consistently. So then we did 2 interviews while we were there with the 2 leading kind of magazines in Japan. Each interview was supposed to go a half hour. And it was done with Michelle and I. At the end of 3 hours on each interview, we had to kick the journalists sort of out. And you could tell there was a quest for understanding and to dig deeper. And you just knew in that society there was a great opportunity. All the while, I knew, contrary to your situation where your local leader was supportive, I knew our local Japanese leader was not real supportive. So I knew when I left, chances are our employees were getting really mixed messages. So we leave and all that. And I know our chairman and CEO is going to be in Japan the next week. So I called Mark. I said, Mark, I just got 2 questions. When you're meeting with Kada-san, just ask. Ask about that event. Show, kind of in a subtle way by asking questions, show your support. So we get Kada-san on board. And so all that is just strategic to what's in the culture, what's the state of your local leadership, what's the state of the local laws, and,
Right.
and you got to go country by country. And when we band together as companies, I think we are starting to make even more of a difference.
The partnerships are incredibly important, as Beth said, and it's the same. Part of my portfolio is also civil rights, human rights, free expression, and the partnerships you have to not only work with partners, but think about the repercussions of those partnerships even after you leave Japan. What happens
Right.
after that? And it's the same approach when we're meeting with human civil rights groups, free expression groups. There's a sense of almost counseling them to also be smart in partnering with you. I mean,
Right.
because the inclination, as you know, Randy, you want to go in there and you want to make a difference and you want to have a big impact, but sometimes you really have to think strategically not only about your engagement, but also the impact that it's going to have in the wake of your
Right.
engagement
And what they're,
as well.
they're ready for.
But that said, there are things in working with civil society that corporate America can do that civil society and local partners can't do. One of the most dramatic, I think, engagements that we did was at the Budapest Pride Parade in 2013. We decided we were going to lead that Pride Parade because a couple of years prior to that, there had been a great deal of violence and attacks on the marchers. The police had failed to protect them. And in working with local partners, they said it would really make a difference if you participated, because the government is going to be sure that if Google is leading that parade, that there will be protection. There won't be violence because they're frightened to death of that becoming a story or there being some sort of friction between you and the government. And we did that, and it had a huge impact. I mean, those civil society partners that we still engage with in Hungary talk about that, not only in terms of that parade, but as a turning point in their engagement and in their role within the country.
Something really important there that I'd like to comment on is the nature of that partnership. I mean, the fact that Google was engaging with civil society actors, engaging with folks who know their own environment,
Right.
and are looking and who know, I think, the levers that change is gonna need to take. But how powerful is that? That's a conversation that is difficult for us on the government side to have. That providing those protections when Google is standing up is just different than if you had a state actor that was up there, right?
Sure.
Because then you can shift the conversation into a variety of things that are completely unrelated. But if it's Google that's there protecting the integrity of your brand and your business, who can argue with that? And that's incredibly powerful. And I think the nature of that partnership is important. As important as it is, I think also to make sure that we're smart enough to engage in each country on its own terms. So you're exactly right that I think we have to be nimble enough to know that this is not a one-size-fits-all problem globally. That there are places where we can have an influence. There are places where too overt an engagement can actually have negative consequences.
Right.
And we need to know the difference. But I think that there's tremendous possibilities when you simply demystify the process, right? Because the fact that you get up and do those interviews, you simply provide a human face and a context for what for many people is a rather abstract issue.
Right.
But it's not, ultimately. And I think that that's an incredibly powerful tool to just sort of dismiss some of the ignorance, dismiss some of the lack of knowledge. And I think we have a lot of allies out there when we do that.
So we were hoping to have time for Q&A. We're getting really close to the end, but we maybe have time for Harry, Harry and then,
Thanks, Katie, and thanks to the panel. Harry Keeley.
Here, take the,
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Katie. Thanks to the panel. Harry Keeley from the California State Teachers Retirement System. Most recently chaired the board and hopefully will be chairing the investment committee in the near future. So my question is, we have a pretty active program around environmental, social, and governance issues, and we've got a strong track record on governance, corporate governance matters. We're spending a lot of time on environmental. So those of us that are deeply committed to social and human rights want to think we have a nice platform for us to advance this issue. So who do we partner with? How do we create the appropriate partnerships? And I think that's really the question: is who do we partner with, and how do we begin that conversation with external partners? For those of us that are committed to doing that internally within our boardroom.
Great question. Who
Should
wants to
I-
take that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you know, Beth mentioned Open for Business, and I think that is a really terrific vehicle. What it is that, you know, Google and EY are founding members of this. It really makes the economic argument for LGBT inclusion and equality, and I think, especially at Cal STRS, that's the sort of argument that's going to resonate really well. You know, I know a little bit about Cal STRS from my time in the Controller's office in California, and Cal STRS, you know, has to protect the integrity of those investments. I mean, it plays a very important role. You could engage on this issue simply from the perspective of this is good for business. And that's what Open for Business does. It makes the arguments that inclusion and LGBT rights make businesses stronger. And it has this great report that incorporates all the various arguments from, you know, reaching consumers to letting employees be their full selves at work. It puts it all in one place. And I think working with them and working on the basis of this makes economic sense is probably a good approach for Cal STRS and CalPERS as well.
I agree. Go ahead. No, go.
No, I would second that about Open for Business. I think that's an extraordinary resource, and I think there are others as well. I would point to the work that Out Leadership has been doing to really help CEOs have the tools and the knowledge they need to engage on this globally. And I think there's a great resource there to be had.
I think
as
we
well.
actually have someone from Open for Business in the audience.
And
too,
from Out
so-
Leadership.
Yeah,
too.
so you can connect. Okay, let's just do one more question. I know we're out of time, but I did say, if you could just tell us your name and where
My name is Tim Hoy. I'm with Wasserman Media Group. And my question is sort of, one of my clients, not Jason, who is big in China. I do a lot of work in China with athletes. A couple weeks ago, I got approached from somebody at a fast food company that make Chick-fil-A that wants to go into China and wants to use a client who's huge in China maybe to do that. So, I don't even go there to eat, and I guess what I want to know is, because I don't really have anybody to discuss this with. I mean, I've talked to my client about it, who knows that I'm gay, and what do I say to these people at Chick-fil-A? This could be very lucrative, but they obviously have a problem with gay rights.
So Chick-fil-A, can someone give some context? I mean, they were the fast food company that has been very outspoken about not, I don't want to say discrimination, but not supportive of LGBT rights and been in the headlines quite, yeah.
On the grounds of religious differences.
Yeah, for the religious differences. So who wants to take that one? And then I know we have to close. Anyone?
Let me take it from an angle maybe you don't. The religious intersection is a whole nother conversation that I think is yet to have, and especially around the world. It's an important one. This isn't a direct answer to your question, but I'm a firm believer that you don't change things from the outside, you change them from the inside. And so you have to get your knees skinned and a little bloody in order to make change, and you have to be at the table in order to change the decisions that are being made. So I come from everything from a philosophy of you can't foul out of the game and win the game if you're on the bench. I mean, you got to be in the game. So part of me doesn't run from situations that on their surface appear different. So for instance, North Carolina, there's a decision Deutsche Bank makes, or I think it was PayPal makes, to not expand in North Carolina. That's because you're not already there. But for a company in North Carolina or for a company in Indonesia, it's a different decision of do you pull out? Because if you pull out, then your workforce is gone, and then what good are you? To make change. So just a principle almost to frame the thinking to your dilemma.
So thank you. Thanks first to the panel. I think it was a great conversation. I appreciate you all taking the time to be here, and thank you for coming.